Constantinople could have ruled the entire Ecumene. At times it almost did. Under Justinian, Heraclius, Nicephorus Phocas, Basil the Bulgar Slayer and Manuel Komnenos, there was no state left to defy the Romans. There was no other empire stronger than Eastern Rome. But those great men are dead, their armies are gone, and their subjects are now subservient to foreign kings. Now we live in the final days. The envy of the barbarians had made the free men of Rome to turn to prayers as their last hope for salvation. Basil must weep from his tomb in Selymbria if the dead weep. Anyone would weep in his place, but one can also hope. The world turns. What was once may come again. God still has plans for men's lives. So perhaps God still wishes for Constantinople to be great again. Perhaps a new Belisarius will take up the sword. Perhaps a new Alexius Komnenos may bring order where there is chaos. Perhaps a new Anastasius may remake the world of man into a better place. Perhaps. On the 29th of May 1453, Constantinople, the capital of the 1,000-year-old Roman Empire, fell to the Ottomans, putting an end to an entire era of human history. But the events of that day did not come as a surprise. The empire had been significantly weakened after the sack of 1204 by the Fourth Crusade, and even after its restoration in 1261, it never managed to attain the same level of power that it once had. Especially after the mid-14th century, a combination of civil wars, corruption and plagues reduced the once mighty empire to a collection of disjoint territories, some strips of land around Constantinople, Thessaloniki and the Peloponnese. Despite the relative hopelessness of the situation, the empire's administration never truly gave up. On the contrary, the 15th century Eastern Roman Empire devised a series of plans that aimed at the state's survival, either in a physical form or even as an idea for the generations to follow. In this video, we'll examine and assess most of those plans, starting from the most pragmatic up to the most unhinged. Additionally, we'll identify the main supporter for each plan, whether institutional or ideological, and then assess each plan along three axes: its feasibility, its potential effectiveness in ensuring the state's survival, and the extent to which it would alter the empire's identity if it succeeded. After the Great Schism of 1054, relations between Orthodox and Catholics naturally soured, with the feelings of hate and distrust between them culminating in the Fourth Crusade. However, there was still room for diplomacy and trust, especially if one of those two sides backed down on the religious stance. After 1204, though, only the Orthodox could realistically step back, since its political power stood greatly diminished. The first emperor that tried to pursue the submissive religious policy was Michael VIII Palaiologos, who managed to momentarily hold back Western campaigns against Constantinople after the Council of Lyon. This approach was deeply unpopular within the empire, and thus no other monarch attempted something similar for the next 3 generations. Nevertheless, during the times of his great-great-grandson, John V Palaiologos, the political situation had become so desperate that the emperor personally converted to Catholicism in an effort to gain support against the Ottomans without the expected outcome. John V's son and also Constantine XI's father, Manuel II Palaiologos, disagreed with this approach, but still managed to gain Western support through clever diplomacy. He presented himself around the courts of Europe as the prestigious Emperor of the East, not a mere beggar as John V was often described. Still, the issue of military assistance was not resolved. The next emperor, John VIII, tried to resolve the religious issues with the West again, but with a much more diplomatic manner. He attempted to mend the schism with a synod as legitimate sounding as possible. Official delegates from all over the East were called to decide on the union of churches in Ferrara and Florence. Eventually, the political motives proved stronger than the integrity of the faith, and the churches were officially united, but only the emperor and part of his supporters agreed on that, the so-called Unionists. Constantine Palaiologos held the same stance as his brother John up to his death in 1453, even if the decision proved a detriment to his popularity. Additionally, it is attested that the last emperor himself only accepted the union in name. Probably he did not accept the union as a private belief. But how effective was this policy? The West did attempt to help Constantinople with grand expeditions at least twice. The campaigns culminating at Nicopolis in 1396 and Varna in 1444 were both testaments to this. Both expeditions led to failure, but they held potential for substantial success. Would they have occurred if the attempted subjugation had not happened? Possibly, since the Catholic powers, especially Venice, Genoa, Naples and Hungary, were also threatened by the Ottoman expansion. On the internal side, these decisions caused a great division in society, but at the last minute all of the populace united to defend the city in the last siege. Overall, the strategy was sound. The empire did not really commit to the union of churches, as the actions of the emperors were not sincere in their dealings with the West, thus the real character of Eastern Rome was not altered by those decisions, and the internal divisions in the end were not really that deep. Both Unionists and anti-Unionists defended the capital during the last siege. Help did arrive thanks to the Catholic policy, but it probably have arrived anyways, perhaps in smaller numbers. During the last 2 centuries of the Eastern Roman Empire's life, the Peloponnese Peninsula was the most prosperous and stable of its domains. Ample manpower, agricultural production, harsh terrain for protection against external enemies, and a generally good defensive position, coupled with a respectable size, all allowed for a potential power base to be established there. Among the region's strong points also lay Mistras, a formidable mountain citadel where Plithon Gemistos, one of the most influential late Byzantine philosophers, had also set up a circle of disciples, essentially a small academy. Plithon was a figure respected by the Palaeologi emperors and despots, and he would thus often make suggestions to them on how to run the state. He claimed that the Morea suffered from kakopolitia, basically bad governance, and if several reforms were to be implemented, the peninsula could be the springboard for a new Hellenocentric state. He suggests splitting society into different classes. The ones cultivating the land and the craftsmen would be the working class. This class would economically support the other two, who would not have to worry about material possessions, the warrior class and the philosopher class. As their names suggest, the profession of the military class would be war, essentially permanent soldiers, while the philosophers would act as the righteous ruling elite. Plithon describes thus a society close to the Spartan one, and even closer to the one described in Plato's Politia. We cannot know how a society like this would work out, or if it was even feasible at all. The only thing certain is that the Spartans had managed to build a very strong power base under a similar system, even managing to push back the mighty Achaemenid Empire. Additionally, with Mistras acting as a cultural hub for the entirety of Europe, thanks to Platon's teachings, a prolonged life for the Despotate of Morea in any form would gather even more support for its cause. For example, the respect and influence that Platon commanded in the West was so impressive that Platon's body, after his death in 1452 or 1454, was recovered by the Malatesta family in 1465. Before the last siege, Constantine Palaiologos had been involved in the administration of the state for several decades. Most notably, during his tenure as despot of Morea from 1443, he fortified his power base in the Peloponnese with a hexamillion and then led an offensive military campaign in central Greece in 1444. In his attempt to support the Varna Crusade and the Albanians of George Kastriotis, the despot of Morea marched against the Duchy of Athens, a vassal of the Ottomans, bringing it under Byzantine rule, and then moved on up to the Pindus Mountains, where the locals showed support for his campaign. These successes, however, were not meant to last, as after the defeat of the Varna Crusade, a huge Ottoman army marched south against the Peloponnese and swiftly destroyed the hexamillion defenses. For more details on these endeavors, you can watch our video on the life of Constantine Palaiologos. The key takeaway from this expedition is that at least a substantial part of the military leadership of the Romans was still willing to confront the Ottomans head-on, contrary to popular belief. The Ottomans definitely possessed a huge numerical and qualitative advantage at this point. Thousands of trained fighters fighting for personal loot and positions of power within an expanding Ottoman state. However, the Ottomans were conquerors on a foreign land. Much of the Balkan population held deep respect and loyalty to the emperor, as shown by the expedition of Constantine Palaiologos, and to the Patriarchate of Constantinople. So would it be possible for a coordinated attempt to have led to the toppling of Turkish rule from the Balkan? For that to be the case, the bulk of the Ottoman army would have to be annihilated or at least defeated. And this could have only been done with a combination of a Christian force like the one at Varna being victorious, coupled with Kastriotis' guerrilla tactics and Constantine's authority pushing the populace in open revolt. In 1453, the only possible claimant to the throne of Mehmed II was Orhan Çelebi, an Ottoman prince held hostage in Constantinople along with his bodyguard. Those men would have been fairly loyal to the Romans, since their fate would be sealed if they were released in the hands of the Sultan. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, after his ascension to the throne in 1451, had issued a law making the fratricide of the Sultan's brothers an official practice with the aim of avoiding civil wars like the Ottoman interregnum of 1402 to 1413. Thus the rival claimants to the throne were a real problem for the Ottoman government. To keep Orhan Çelebi in check, the Ottomans paid a tribute to Constantinople. In 1451, Constantine Palaiologos tried to threaten the release of Orhan in hopes of gaining a bigger tribute from the Ottomans, as the state's coffers were empty. The emperor hoped to bolster the defenses of the city with the extra funds. However, this plan backfired tragically. The threatening letter that Constantine sent was intercepted by the Ottoman Grand Vizier, Chandal Halil Pasha, a man who had attempted to ease tensions between the Ottomans and Constantinople. He is reported to have been enraged with the Byzantine threats, leading to the relations between the two states to deteriorate even further. Constantine did not release Orhan either, as it is possible that the support for the prince was actually minimal within the Ottoman domains, and probably this whole scheme was a bluff in the first place. Nevertheless, Orhan and his bodyguard fought with the Romans until the very end, perishing after the final siege. Bessarion of Trebizond, a student of Plithon Gemistos, also proposed a plan similar to the one of his teachers for the survival of the state in the Peloponnese. However, besides fortifying Morea and fixing the class structure of the region, Bessarion, also a proponent of the Ferrara-Florence Union, proposes that young Greek men educate themselves in the universities of Western Europe so that they come up with plans to administrate the untapped resources of the Morea. In addition to the existing local population, immigrants from the other parts of the empire would be encouraged to relocate to the region. Probably a more realistic plan than the one of Plithon, but certainly a plan not without its difficulties. Both Plithon and Bessarion probably viewed the current situation on grand strategy terms, but would often lack pragmatism on the ground. For men to study in the hundreds, substantial funds would be required, and the whole endeavor would need decades to materialize. Additionally, relocating such a vast number of immigrants, even if Greek-speaking in an already inhabited region, would be challenging. Not the craziest of plans, but definitely one requiring funds and coordination. A big part of the Roman elite contemplated a compromise with the Ottomans. This had already been the case for former Roman subjects all across Anatolian Greece. The Ottomans often offered a better alternative to Byzantine rule: a stable government, low taxes, a big internal market for trading and producing goods, a meritocratic system, and even freedom of faith. A subjugation under terms, with the Romans retaining their identity but compromising their sovereignty, looked appealing, especially when masked as an act against the union of the churches that the last emperors proposed. The last subjects of the empire may have regarded the salvation of their souls under Orthodox spiritual guidance as more important than political sovereignty under Catholic rule. And this could be negotiated with a conqueror, as the Ottomans would themselves have trouble controlling the huge Orthodox populations of the Balkans. Thus a plan was devised. The Ottomans would help protect and expand the Patriarchate of Constantinople as the spiritual and political authority in the Balkans, the milliet, or else the Roman nation. This nation would consist of the Orthodox peoples of the Balkans, who would be guided by the Patriarch of Constantinople, an ideological supporter for this administration, Gennadios Scholarios, a former student of Plithon Gemistos. With the Ottomans, the Patriarchate held more power than it ever did over the last centuries of Byzantine rule. But even if subjugated to the Ottomans, the Patriarchate would still act as the beacon of orthodoxy and Greek language in the region. Not all Romans desired to fight to the bitter end. On the contrary, it might have been the majority of them that switched sides over the past 2 centuries, adopting a completely new Ottoman and Islamic identity. Many considered such an option as they felt the Byzantine society was too corrupt to offer a potential for status or economic growth, as the existing elites were already too well established and prioritized their survival over the state's prosperity. Notable examples of such men are Evrenos Bey, a Roman from Asia Minor who ended up becoming one of the most successful conquerors in the Balkans, with his family retaining power in the town of Yenitsa until 1912. Or Halil Pasha, a man with a similar background who became the Grand Vizier of the Ottomans and was the one to conduct diplomacy with the Byzantines until 1453. On top of those, many high-ranking officials as well as soldiers and common folk would have chosen this path. If you cannot beat them, join them. A process that had long started since 1071 and the Battle of Manzikert, and would lead to the gradual Turkification of Anatolia. Besides willing conversions, young Christian boys would also be captured with force by the Ottoman authorities to be conscripted as janissaries in the Ottoman army, while Christian girls would be forced into Ottoman harems. This plan had a possible ideological supporter, George Amiroudis. Even if most probably an opportunist, Amiroudis was a man with extensive education, respected for his knowledge, and a part of the Byzantine court, and later also part of the delegation to Ferrara, Florence. He strongly supported the union, probably after being bribed by the Catholics, but later condemned it. He is well known for convincing the last emperor of Trebizond to surrender the city to Mehmed the Conqueror. He served the Sultan for many years, often also acting as his teacher, and eventually converted to Islam. Constantine Palaiologos left his last breath during the final siege of 1453, possibly fighting alongside his soldiers. After the siege was over, Mehmed searched for the body of the last emperor, but he could not find anything. Nevertheless, all eyewitnesses and contemporary chroniclers agree that Constantine went down fighting. This is really important, as the last emperor was not forced to suffer his fate. Mehmed had offered Constantine an escape just before the final assault, which Constantine refused with the following words: "The city entrusted to me is not mine to decide to surrender. We will all die willingly." Besides this offer, he could have easily boarded one of the Latin ships in the city, as many others did, and escaped the worst fate, and then even plan a daring reconquest expedition. Nevertheless, the decision of Constantine to die essentially as a martyr ensured an eternal legacy, a legacy that was often used in the centuries to follow to inspire men to fight for their freedom from the Ottoman rule, or even for the restoration of the empire. Here are some examples of his legacy. In 1571, the Metropolitan of Monemvasia, Makarios Melissurgos, produced an inspiring last speech that he attributed to Constantine Palaiologos during the final siege, in order to stir up a revolt in the Morea after the naval battle of Lepanto in 1571. Melissurgos is often referred to as a pseudo-Strangis, as he claims the speech was recorded by the actual Strangis. Nevertheless, the reference to Constantine Palaiologos seemed to be enough to inspire men 100 years after his death. Constantine XI is described as the marbled emperor by folk tradition, even if the initial tradition attributes this description to Emperor Ioannis Vatagis. As per the records of the lagographer Nikolaos Politis, the folk tradition states that an angel saved Constantine in the last moment during the siege, and his body turned to marble, hidden in a cave within Constantinople. During the War of Greek Independence, Greek rebels, and more specifically Theodoros Kolokotronis, still referred to Constantine Palaiologos as their king 370 years after his death. Many relics attributed to the last emperor exist and held significant value over the centuries. Alexander Ypsilantis, a Greek noble and advocate for the Greek Revolution, claimed to have possessed the sword of the last emperor to bolster the support for a revolution against the Turks. In the modern Greek state, which is in large part a cultural successor of the late Eastern Roman Empire, King Constantine I of the Glücksburg dynasty is often referred to as Constantine XII, in an attempt to relate him to the legendary last emperor, as the later Constantine was also energetic in campaigns against the Ottomans. Still in modern Greece, many streets are named after the last emperor, while two statues depicting him exist, one in Mistras and another one in the center of Athens. It is thus made clear that the legend of the martyrdom of Constantine Palaiologos, in the face of overwhelming odds, offered much more to his cause than anything else he pursued, as with the coordinated effort of literate men of the era, his legacy inspired millions in the centuries to come after his sacrifice.